On a bright winter morning in Colorado, a forgotten veteran stood before a house half buried in snow. Jonah Sterling had lost his name, his honor, and nearly every person who once believed him. But one loyal German shepherd named Talon still walked beside him, scarred ear raised against the wind. Inside that strange mountain house, the past was not dead. It was waiting beneath the living room floor. What Talon found there would not erase Jonah's pain, but it would give the truth one last chance to breathe. This is a story about loyalty, silence, and the kind of hope that survives even under snow. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 5,000 subscribers so I can keep writing more stories like this. In winter, Denver did not look cruel at first glance. Cruel things, Jonah Sterling had learned, often arrived wearing beauty like a clean uniform. The city shone under a fresh fall of snow, every rooftop powdered white, every bus shelter rimmed with ice, every street lamp glowing pale gold before sunrise. The mountains stood far off in the west, blue and enormous, like old judges who had heard too many confessions to be impressed by another man's ruin. Jonah slept beneath the awning of an old bus station 3 blocks from Colfax Avenue, wrapped in a faded army coat with a torn collar and one missing button. He was 49 years old, broad-shouldered, still built like a man who had once carried maps, radios, and other men's fear across hard ground. His red and black flannel jacket was layered under the coat, the cuffs frayed and rolled to his elbows even in cold weather, as if some part of him refused to admit defeat to frost. Beneath it, a washed-out army green T-shirt clung to a body that had grown leaner from hunger, but not soft. Around his neck, hidden under cloth and beard shadow, hung a pair of dull silver dog tags. Talon slept on the outside. The German shepherd lay between Jonah and the street, his black and gold coat dusted with snowflakes, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. One ear stood sharp and alert. The other, the left, bore a jagged scar along the edge where a piece of metal had torn it years ago. It never rose quite as high as the right. That small imperfection made him look less like a polished military dog and more like an old banner that had survived a terrible wind. A bus hissed at the curb. Talon opened one amber-brown eye. "Easy," Jonah murmured. The dog closed the eye again, but not before giving a long, offended sigh through his nose, the kind of sigh that suggested civilization had once again failed to meet his standards. Jonah almost smiled. It was the sort of almost smile he allowed himself now. Small, brief, gone before it could be mistaken for hope. A woman in a wool hat stepped out of the station with a paper cup of coffee. She glanced at Jonah, then at Talon, then quickly away. Not frightened, not cruel, just careful. People had a way of looking at a man with no address as if misfortune might be contagious. Jonah did not blame her. Blame had become a room he knew too well. He had lived in it, slept in it, eaten cold sandwiches in it, heard his name spoken through its walls by men who once called him brother. Jonah Sterling, former Army artillery officer. Jonah Sterling, court-martialed. Jonah Sterling, the man accused of sending a corrected fire coordinate packet through an unauthorized back channel, breaching protocol, altering transmission logs, and causing a tragedy that left 3 soldiers gone and a dozen families with empty chairs at their tables. That was the clean version, the official version, the version with stamps, signatures, and enough solemn language to make a lie look like a marble monument. The truth had been messier. There had been a timing fault in the command chain, a discrepancy in the synchronization logs, a correction order that came through too late and from the wrong node. Jonah had reported it before the hearing. He had said the system clock drift did not match the main record. He had said someone had overwritten a secondary log. His words had not saved him. They had sharpened the blade. If he knew something was wrong, prosecutors asked, why did he not stop it? If he noticed a discrepancy, why did his access tag appear in the record? If he was innocent, Why did the corrected coordinate file carry his authentication trail? Jonah had answered each question until language itself felt useless. He had stood in his dress uniform beneath fluorescent lights while Colonel Wade Harlan, his former commander, sat with a face carved into official sorrow. Harlan had looked like a man grieving for the dead. Behind closed doors, he had been something else, careful, protected, and already surrounded by people in better suits than soldiers wore. Northgate Strategic Solutions had appeared in the margins of the investigation, never central enough to be blamed, always close enough to adjust what needed adjusting. Contractors, consultants, systems specialists. Men who used words like data integrity and operational risk while a soldier's name was buried one form at a time. And Claire. Jonah looked down at Talon before the thought could finish. The dog had lifted his head again. "Don't start," Jonah said softly. Talon blinked. "I know. Breakfast?" At the word, the dog sat up with immediate moral clarity. "You don't salute anymore, but you understand breakfast like scripture." Talon sneezed into the snow. Jonah pushed himself upright. His knees complained. His back joined them. Together, his bones held a brief committee meeting and voted against the day. He ignored the decision. From beneath the bench, he pulled out a canvas pack containing everything that remained easy to carry. A spare shirt, Talon's collapsible bowl, 2 cans of dog food, a cracked phone that only worked near free Wi-Fi, and an old brass compass wrapped in a sock. He had not looked at the compass in weeks. It had belonged to Arthur Bellamy, his mother's father, though Jonah had only met the man a handful of times as a boy. Arthur had been tall, narrow, and quiet, with thick glasses and hands that always smelled faintly of metal, dust, and cold coffee. Once, when Jonah was 10, Arthur had placed the compass in his palm and closed the boy's fingers over it. "You do not always need to know where you are," the old man had said, "but you had better know where north is." At 10, Jonah thought it was the sort of thing old men said because nobody stopped them. At 49, sleeping under a bus station awning, with snow in his beard, he wondered whether Arthur had understood more than anyone gave him credit for. Talon nudged the pack. "Yes, Your Majesty?" Jonah opened a can of food and emptied it into the bowl. Talon waited, disciplined, but trembling slightly with impatience. That was Talon's genius. He could survive artillery, patrol work, chaos, and human stupidity, yet still regarded canned beef chunks as a miracle worth reverence. "Go on." The dog ate? Jonah watched him with the tired tenderness of a man guarding the last warm coal in a ruined temple. Talon had been with the unit overseas, scout-trained, sharp-nosed, steady under pressure. He had walked ahead of men who pretended not to be afraid. He had found danger before danger found them. He had been there during the strike that changed everything, when sound and dust and confusion folded the world into a shape no one could later explain without leaving something out. After the case, after the discharge, after Claire stopped answering, Talon was supposed to be reassigned. Some paperwork failed to travel faster than mercy. A handler who owed Jonah nothing and remembered enough had quietly made sure Talon came home with him. Jonah never asked how. There were miracles too small for churches, but too large to question. When the dog finished eating, he licked the bowl clean and pressed his muzzle against Jonah's wrist. Not begging, checking. Talon did this when Jonah drifted too far inward. A nudge, a breath, a weight against the pulse. "Come back, still here. Count the breaths. Count me." Jonah lowered his hand to the dog's scarred ear. "I'm here," he said. Talon looked unimpressed by the announcement, as if presence was not a statement but a duty. The door of the outreach center opened at 7. By then, the sky had turned pearl gray, and the snow had begun to glitter under morning light. The building was a low brick place wedged beside a shuttered diner and a tire shop. Inside, it smelled of weak coffee, damp coats, old radiator heat, and the exhausted kindness of volunteers who had learned not to ask too many questions before offering toast. Jonah preferred the corner table. Talon lay under it, nose pointed toward the room, back against Jonah's boot. A few people knew them. Most left them alone. One older volunteer named Frank always gave Talon half a biscuit and pretended Jonah did not notice. Jonah always noticed. He also always looked away, because dignity sometimes survived by accepting small lies gently. He had just wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee when the room shifted. Not loudly. No one gasped. No door slammed. But Talon felt it first. The dog raised his head. Then Jonah saw her. She stood near the entrance with snow melting on the shoulders of a gray wool coat, a leather satchel hanging heavy at her side. She was in her early 50s, perhaps, with chestnut hair streaked silver and tied low at the neck. Her face was not soft, but it was not hard either. It had the tired precision of someone who had spent years reading fine print while people's lives trembled between clauses. Her eyes found Jonah, not by accident. Talon rose to his feet under the table. The woman stopped a respectful distance away. "Mr. Sterling?" Jonah did not answer at first. Men from old trouble often began with his last name. Talon stepped out from beneath the table, placing himself half a body length ahead of Jonah. Not threatening, not friendly. A golden black question with teeth. The woman looked at the dog, then back at Jonah. "My name is Maribel Quinn. Mara, if that helps. I'm an attorney." "That doesn't help as much as you think," Jonah said. A corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. "Fair. I don't have money. I'm aware. That usually ends attorney conversations. This one was paid for in advance." Jonah's hand tightened around the coffee cup until the cardboard bent. Mara noticed. She noticed everything, he suspected, and filed it somewhere behind those brown eyes. "I represented Arthur Bellamy's estate," she said. The name moved through Jonah like a door opening in a house he had forgotten he once entered. Arthur. The compass in his pack seemed suddenly heavier. "My grandfather's dead," Jonah said. Mara's expression changed, not into pity, which he would have hated, but into something more careful. "Yes, I'm sorry." Jonah looked down at Talon. The dog had not moved. His scarred ear twitched once. "I barely knew him." "He knew more about you than you might think." That sentence should have angered Jonah. Instead, it lodged somewhere under his ribs. Mara set a sealed envelope on the table. Jonah did not touch it. "He left you property," she continued. "A house near Leadville, technically outside town limits, built into a mountainside. Unusual structure. Very Arthur from what I can tell." Jonah gave a dry breath that might have become a laugh in another life. "Ma'am, I sleep behind a bus station. If this is some kind of paperwork mistake, it picked a dramatic place to land." "It isn't a mistake. I can't maintain a house." "You may sell it?" That he understood. There it was. The practical mercy. Sell the strange inheritance. Get enough money for a room, maybe a truck, a veterinarian visit for Talon's stiff hip, a winter coat without holes. Begin again, if beginning again was still allowed for men whose names had been burned in public. But Mara was not finished. "There is a condition in the will." Jonah looked at her then. "What condition?" Mara opened her satchel and withdrew a copied page. Her fingers were bare despite the cold, nails short, no ornament except a plain ring on her right hand. She read the line not theatrically, but as if it had bothered her for several nights. "The hatch beneath the living room must not be sealed again until snow has fallen 3 times. For a moment the sounds of the outreach center faded. Coffee pouring, chairs scraping, someone coughing near the bulletin board. Jonah stared at her. Then he looked at Talon. The dog gave one quiet huff, as if old men leaving mysterious instructions beneath living rooms were exactly the sort of nonsense humans would produce. "A hatch," Jonah said. "That's what it says." "Beneath the living room." "Yes." And snow has to fall 3 times before anyone seals it. That is the wording. My grandfather built houses or fairy tales? Radar systems, Mara said, and possibly both. Against his will, Jonah thought of Arthur's narrow hands, the compass, the smell of metal, the strange command about north. He pushed the paper back toward her. I'll sell. Mara did not seem surprised. There may already be a buyer. That should have been good news. Instead, Talon's head lifted. Already? Jonah asked. A company called Northgate Strategic Solutions contacted my office before the estate notice completed its first round of filings. They offered significantly above valuation. Jonah became very still. Mara noticed that too. Northgate, he said. You know them. Everyone in my case knew them. They were the kind of people who stood near the fire and claimed they only smelled smoke. Mara's face sharpened. That may be important? Before Jonah could answer, the outreach center door opened again. Cold air entered first. Then a man in a tailored charcoal overcoat stepped inside. He did not belong there, and he knew it. Some people entered poor places with embarrassment. This man entered as if poverty were simply another room he had paid to access. He was in his mid-40s, tall, clean-shaven, with neatly combed dark blonde hair and pale gray eyes. His leather gloves were black. His shoes were too polished for sidewalks in slush. Talon moved before Jonah did. The dog stepped into the aisle and stood squarely between Jonah and the stranger. His right ear rose. His scarred left ear angled crookedly. A low sound gathered in his chest, not loud, not wild, but old as winter under stone. The man paused. His eyes flicked down to Talon, then up to Jonah. Mr. Sterling, he said. Gideon Vale, Northgate Strategic Solutions. His voice was smooth, almost warm. Jonah thought of snow falling on the edge of a blade. Mara rose slowly from her chair. Mr. Vale, this is not an appropriate place for estate negotiation. Gideon gave her a courteous nod. Ms. Quinn, I apologize for the intrusion. I only hope to express our interest directly. Mr. Sterling has endured enough uncertainty. We can offer him a clean solution. A clean solution. Jonah had heard men say cleaner things over dirtier work. Gideon removed one glove finger by finger. The property is remote, structurally complicated, and expensive to maintain. We are prepared to pay well above market value. Quickly. Privately. Talon growled again. This time the sound carried. People turned. Jonah placed a hand on Talon's back. Beneath the fur, muscle trembled, not with fear but restraint. Gideon smiled faintly. His eyes did not. A loyal animal. The best kind of person, Jonah said. Mara's mouth twitched. Gideon let the comment pass. Think about the offer. A man in your position deserves relief. There it was, polite pity, sharpened into leverage, a man in your position, homeless, disgraced, cold, tired, hungry enough to consider selling the last strange gift from a grandfather he hardly knew. Jonah thought of Talon's medicine, of a room with a door, of waking without frost on his sleeves, of vanishing somewhere no one knew the name. Sterling. Then Talon shifted backward just enough for his flank to press against Jonah's knee. A reminder. A weight still here. Jonah looked at Mara. She gave him nothing except the truth of her silence. No urging, no rescue, just the space to choose. He looked at Gideon Vale and saw not a buyer, but timing. Northgate had known too soon. Northgate had arrived too clean. Northgate had come looking for a house before Jonah even knew it was his. No, Jonah said. Gideon's face remained pleasant, but something behind it cooled. No? I'm going to see the property first. A difficult trip in this weather. I've had worse travel conditions. "I'm sure you have." Jonah stood. He was taller than Gideon, broader, rougher, his flannel frayed, and his boots scarred. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like a man being moved off a sidewalk. "I'll let Miss Quinn know if I decide to sell." Gideon looked at Talon. Talon stared back and sneezed once, sharply, as if rejecting a bad argument. Someone near the coffee urn coughed to hide a laugh. Gideon slipped his glove back on. "Of course. I look forward to continuing the conversation." "I don't," Jonah said. The man's smile thinned. Then he turned and left, carrying his winter scent and polished threat back into the bright Denver morning. For several seconds, no one spoke. Mara gathered her papers. That was either brave or unwise. Most things I've done worth remembering were both. Talon leaned against his leg. Jonah reached into his pack and felt the outline of Arthur's compass through the sock. He did not take it out. Not yet. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and glittering, dusting the bus station windows and the city streets and the shoulders of men who had nowhere to go. But Jonah Sterling, for the first time in years, had a direction. Not hope. Hope was too large a word, too bright, too easily broken. Direction was enough. He would go to the mountains. He would see the house built into the snow. He would stand where Arthur Bellamy had once stood and decide with his own eyes what needed to be sold, sealed, or remembered. Talon looked up at him, scarred ear crooked, amber eyes steady. And in that gaze, Jonah saw an order older than grief, older than shame, older even than the name stamped on his ruined record. Move. So he did. The road to Leadville rose like a pale ribbon through the high country. By mid-morning, Denver had fallen behind them, swallowed by distance and winter glare. Mara Quinn's old Subaru climbed steadily westward, its heater working with the desperate loyalty of an aging mule. Snowbanks lined the highway. Sunlight struck them so fiercely that Jonah had to narrow his eyes, the whole world flashing silver at the edges, as if the mountains had spilled coins across the earth and forgotten to gather them. Talon sat in the back, braced wide-legged against the turns, his scarred left ear tilted crookedly, while his right stood sharp as a sentry's blade. Every few miles he pressed his nose to the glass, fogging it with a solemn breath, then sneezed at the scenery as though judging Colorado's grandeur to be poorly seasoned. Mara glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Does he always review landscapes? Only the ones that disappoint him. That must be exhausting. He has standards. Jonah said it dryly, but his hand rested on the brass compass in his coat pocket. He had taken it out that morning before they left Denver. The old metal had been cold against his palm, the needle trembling, then finding north with patient indifference. Arthur Bellamy had been gone for years from Jonah's life, yet somehow the dead man had reached out with a house, a warning, and a direction. Jonah did not like that. He did not like owing anything to ghosts. The farther they drove, the more the land opened. The mountains did not crowd the sky. They ruled it. Pines stood black-green beneath white burdens. Fences vanished under drifts. Small cabins and barns appeared and disappeared like thoughts one was not ready to speak aloud. It was beautiful in a way that did not ask permission. Mara drove with both hands on the wheel, coffee in the cup holder, her leather satchel wedged by Jonah's boots. Every now and then she looked at him as if weighing whether to say something, then chose the mercy of silence. Jonah appreciated that. Silence, when offered properly, was one of the last forms of respect. The turnoff came after a weathered sign, half buried in snow. The road narrowed, climbing through stands of spruce and aspen, then became less road than suggestion. The Subaru complained. Talon stood, nails clicking softly on the rubber mat. At last, Mara slowed. "There," she said. Jonah looked through the windshield. At first, he saw only stone and snow. Then the house appeared. It was built half into the mountainside, as if it had crawled there in a storm long ago and decided not to leave. The roof was low and heavily blanketed in white. The front wall was stone, thick and rough, interrupted by long, narrow windows that watched the approach with the patient suspicion of an old animal. The rear of the structure vanished into the slope itself, swallowed by earth and winter. It was not grand. It was not charming. It looked stubborn. Jonah felt an immediate and unreasonable dislike for it. Mara parked near a low retaining wall. For several seconds no one moved. The engine ticked. Wind brushed snow across the hood in soft veils. Talon broke the stillness first. He gave a low whine, not fear, not excitement, something stranger, and pushed his muzzle toward the door. Jonah opened it. Cold air came in bright and clean, smelling of pine, stone, and distance. Talon jumped down into the snow, sank nearly to his elbows, and stood with his head high. His amber eyes fixed on the house. Jonah stepped out after him. His boots crunched through crusted snow. The flannel beneath his coat pulled tight across his shoulders as he reached for his pack. Above them, sunlight spilled over the ridge, turning the roofline white gold. For a moment the place looked less like a house and more like the entrance to some old winter shrine built for a god who disliked visitors. "Arthur never did subtle," Mara said. "You knew him well?" "Well enough to know he treated small talk like a security breach." That made Jonah look at her. Mara's mouth lifted at one corner. "He mailed me legal questions in envelopes labeled by urgency, weather condition, and likelihood of government incompetence." Despite himself, Jonah almost smiled. They followed a shoveled path toward the front door. Someone had kept the access clear recently, probably a local service arranged by the estate. The door was heavy, dark wood reinforced with metal brackets. Mara unlocked it with a key that looked older than her car. The house opened with a sigh. Inside, the air held the cold stillness of a place that had been waiting without sleeping. Dust motes drifted in the winter light. The entryway led into a low, wide living room where the ceiling beams ran thick and dark overhead. The rear wall was not fully a wall at all, but a curve of sealed stone where the mountain pressed close behind the house. At the center of the room stood a round concrete fireplace, broad and rough, its chimney rising through the roof like the throat of a sleeping giant. Around it, the stone floor was worn smooth in paths, made by years of one man moving through his habits. Jonah took in the details with a soldier's old instinct: exits, windows, corners, blind spots. Then the strangeness began to reveal itself. Metal plaques remained bolted to sections of wall, each stamped with faded numbers. An old pressure gauge sat near a utility alcove, its needle resting at 0 beneath fogged glass. A weather map of central Colorado was pinned inside a frame, marked with pencil lines so precise they looked like surgical cuts. On a shelf near the fireplace sat notebooks, their spines labeled in Arthur's narrow hand: snow load, vent pressure, cable integrity, winter anomalies. "Cozy," Jonah said. Mara set her satchel on a table. "In Arthur's defense, I believe he considered curtains frivolous. He was wrong." Talon did not care about curtains. The dog moved slowly into the room, head lowered. He did not race from corner to corner. He did not claim the house in the sloppy joy of a pet discovering new territory. Instead, he worked the floor in deliberate lines, nose close to stone, pausing at seams, breathing deeply near the base of the fireplace. Jonah watched him. Talon circled once, then again. At last he stopped beside an old wool rug laid slightly off-center in front of the hearth. The rug was faded red and brown, worn thin along one edge. Talon sniffed it, placed one paw on it, then looked back at Jonah. "What?" Talon scratched lightly. Mara paused in the act of opening her satchel. "Is that normal?" "For him? Depends how many ghosts your client left under the furniture." Talon scratched again, more insistently. Jonah crossed the room and pulled the rug aside. Beneath it lay a rectangular metal plate set into the stone floor. It was not large, maybe 4 feet long and 3 feet wide, dark with age, its edges fitted so tightly that at first it seemed part of the floor. But it was not aligned with the stone pattern. It sat at a slight angle, like a secret poorly disguised by someone who trusted patience more than invisibility. Jonah crouched. The metal was cold even through his glove. Talon lowered himself beside the plate and rested his muzzle against it. Not digging? Listening? A pressure moved through Jonah's chest. Not fear exactly. Something closer to recognition. Mara came to stand behind him. The will said hatch. Could be an old utility access. Could be. Neither of them believed that was all. Jonah stood too quickly, as if distance might make the object less real. We're not opening anything today. I wasn't going to suggest it. Good. Mara's voice softened. Jonah, receiving property doesn't obligate you to solve a dead man's mystery. He looked toward the narrow windows. Beyond them, sunlight struck the snow so brightly, it hurt. No, he said, just to inherit it. The words came out sharper than he intended. Mara did not flinch. She simply returned to the table, opened her satchel, and removed 3 envelopes tied with a blue string. Arthur left instructions. Not many. He was not, as far as I can tell, a man who believed in wasting adjectives. Jonah stayed near the fireplace, one hand resting on Talon's head. Mara opened the first envelope and read silently for a few moments. Her brow furrowed. Then she handed him the page. Arthur's handwriting was small, straight, and severe. If Jonah reaches the house, do not let him sell before the 3rd snow. The house does not keep money, it keeps direction. Jonah stared at the line. It should have sounded absurd. Instead, it sounded like Arthur. Under the sentence were notes about legal fees, property taxes, structural assessments, and access authorization. Arthur had arranged payment for maintenance, legal review, and initial investigation before his death. Not generously exactly, methodically, as if care were a machine he had built in advance because he did not trust emotion to arrive on time. Mara read from another page. He filed information requests concerning defense contractors, tactical coordinate systems, and historical radar infrastructure. Northgate Strategic Solutions appears in 3 of his notes. Jonah folded the paper once, then unfolded it again. I don't want this, he said. I know. No, you don't. His voice remained quiet, but the room seemed to tighten around it. I don't want another file, another review, another table full of people asking why I didn't stop something I didn't do. Talon lifted his head. Jonah looked down and forced his hand to relax. Mara did not answer right away. When she did, her voice carried no pity, which made it easier to bear. Arthur paid me to preserve options, not force decisions. You can leave. You can sell later. You can burn my business card and train Talon to bite lawyers. Talon's ears shifted. Don't give him ideas, Jonah muttered. But I will tell you this, Mara continued. Northgate knew about this house before they should have. Arthur knew that might happen, and whatever is under that plate was important enough for him to write around it like a man hiding a candle from the wind. The house settled in the cold. Somewhere inside the walls came a faint metallic tick. Jonah looked at the plate again. For the first time since they had entered, the place did not feel empty. It felt occupied by unfinished thought. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather over the ridge. The sunlight dulled to pewter. Mara found canned soup in the pantry, still good, because Arthur apparently had planned for siege, famine, and possibly the collapse of ordinary grocery habits. Jonah got the fireplace going after some persuasion, 3 curses, and 1 dry comment from Mara about military competence not extending to kindling. When flame finally caught, the room changed. The concrete hearth glowed, Shadows softened. The stone walls gave back a little warmth. Talon stretched in front of the fire, though he kept one paw touching the edge of the rug. A truck engine approached near dusk. Talon rose before Jonah heard it clearly. Headlights swept across the front windows. A minute later came a knock. 2 solid raps and one afterthought, as if the visitor had nearly forgotten manners but recovered in time. Jonah opened the door with Talon at his side. A broad man stood on the threshold holding a covered pot in both gloved hands. He wore a heavy canvas coat, a wool cap pulled crooked over salt and pepper curls, and a beard that looked as though it had made peace with several winters. His cheeks were red from wind. His pale blue eyes were cheerful without being careless. "You Jonah Sterling?" "Depends what's in the pot," the man grinned. "Elk stew, which means if you say no, I may still come in and eat it myself." Mara appeared behind Jonah. "Caleb Rourke?" "That's me, weather station, Avalanche Point, occasional rescuer of tourists who believe rental SUVs are mountain goats." He looked past them into the room. "And you must be Ms. Quinn. Arthur called you the only attorney he trusted not to alphabetize his soul." Mara blinked. "That may be the nicest thing he ever said about me." Caleb stepped in, stomped snow from his boots with only moderate success, then spotted the metal plates on the wall. He whistled low. "Well, I'll be. Arthur really did keep the bones." "The bones?" Jonah asked. Caleb set the stew on the table and moved closer to the wall, touching one of the faded tags with a gloved finger. "This wasn't always a house, not just a house anyway. Auxiliary radar support station, Cold War era, small one. Most folks forgot it existed. Arthur didn't. Of course, Arthur also remembered where he put screws in 1974, so that's not saying much." He walked the room, eyes bright now with recognition. The humor remained, but beneath it was expertise. "See these gauges? Vent pressure, that rear wall, mountain-facing thermal mass. Smart if you know what you're doing. Dangerous if you start sealing things because they look drafty." Mara looked toward Jonah. Caleb followed her gaze to the rug, then to the exposed metal plate. His smile faded a little. "Ah," Jonah did not like the sound of that. "Utility hatch?" he asked. "Maybe, but if Arthur told you not to seal it before 3 snows, I'd listen." "You know about that?" "Arthur told me enough to be annoying and not enough to be useful. Classic Arthur." Caleb crouched by the plate but did not touch it. Old underground spaces breathe, especially ones cut into mountain rock. Moisture, pressure, temperature, all of it matters. You seal the wrong opening in winter, ice can lock a secondary vent or trap damp air where you don't want it. A place like this can turn stubborn fast. "Stubborn?" Jonah repeated. Caleb glanced up. "You've noticed." Talon moved beside Caleb and sniffed his boot. Then he sneezed. Caleb looked offended. "That is a rescue-grade boot, sir." "Talon has opinions," Jonah said. "I respect a working dog with opinions." That won him a fraction of approval. Talon allowed Caleb to stand. Outside, wind pressed against the house. Snow began to fall again, not softly now, but in slanted sheets that erased the trees one by one. Caleb checked the windows and muttered that the storm had arrived ahead of schedule, which apparently offended him personally. "You planning to head back down tonight?" he asked. Mara looked toward the white blur outside. "Not if I can avoid dying for paperwork." "Good policy." Jonah said nothing. The house had them now, at least until morning. They ate stew from mismatched bowls Arthur had kept in a cabinet, labeled kitchen, daily use, which made Caleb laugh so hard he nearly spilled his portion. For a while, the room almost felt normal. Caleb told a story about Arthur arguing with a county inspector for 47 minutes over the definition of a shed. Mara admitted Arthur once mailed her a 3-page correction to her own invoice math. Talon stationed himself near the hearth, accepting bits of stew meat with the solemn restraint of royalty receiving tribute. Jonah listened more than he spoke. The warmth, the voices, the wind outside, it stirred something in him he distrusted. Not happiness, nothing so reckless, but the shape of a room where a man might sit without being moved along. Night settled fully. The storm thickened. Snow struck the narrow windows with dry whispers. The fireplace burned low and steady, throwing gold over the concrete hearth and across Jonah's face. He sat on the floor with his back against a stone column, sleeves rolled despite the cold, dog tags hidden beneath his army green shirt. Mara sorted Arthur's letters at the table. Caleb checked the pressure gauge near the utility alcove, frowning at it as if it had insulted his mother. Then Talon changed. One moment he lay half asleep near the fire. The next he lifted his head. His right ear rose, the scarred left one tilted. He stood slowly, not barking, not excited. He turned toward the rug and the metal plate beneath it. His nose lowered. He inhaled once, long and deep. Jonah felt the hairs rise along his arms. "Talon," he said quietly. The dog stepped onto the plate. A faint sound answered beneath his weight. Not a creak, not a crack. A hollow, distant note. Talon scratched once. The metal rang. Everyone froze. The sound traveled down into something below them, disappeared, then returned as a soft echo through the floor. Jonah had heard that kind of emptiness before, under floor panels, behind walls, beneath ground that was not as solid as it pretended to be, places where men hid equipment, fear, orders, shame. But this was not a battlefield. This was Arthur's living room. This was a house leaning into a mountain while a winter storm wrapped the world in white. Talon scratched again, harder this time. The hollow sound came back deeper. Mara rose from the table, Arthur's letter still in her hand. Caleb's face had lost its humor entirely. Jonah stood. For years, doors had opened only to remove something from him. Rank, name, home, wife, sleep. This door beneath the floor did not open yet. It merely announced itself, low and patient, like a drum under snow. Talon looked up at him. Jonah placed one hand on the dog's scarred head and stared at the metal plate. For the first time in a very long while, a hidden thing had not come to accuse him. It had come to ask whether he still had the courage to go down. Jonah did not open the hatch that night. The metal plate waited beneath the old wool rug, black and cold and patient, while the storm threw snow against the narrow windows. Talon slept beside it in the way a sentry slept, body still but ears working. Mara tried to make a nest of legal papers at the kitchen table, though the house had a talent for making every sensible task feel like part of a ritual. Caleb took the couch with his boots near the door and a flashlight on his chest, muttering that Arthur Bellamy had built a house better suited for weather instruments than human spines. Jonah stayed awake long after the others had gone quiet. The fire burned low in the round concrete hearth. Its glow ran over the metal plate in dull copper bands. Every so often the wind passed over the roof and found a seam somewhere in the stone, making the house hum softly, like an old radio searching for a station. He could have opened it. Part of him wanted to. That was the part trained by years of maps and impact grids, the part that saw unknown space as a problem to solve before it solved him. But another part, older and harder earned, knew better. A sealed metal door in an old military structure was not a cookie tin. You did not pry it open in the middle of a storm because curiosity had put on boots. So Jonah sat with his back against the stone column, one hand resting on Talon's warm shoulder, and listened to the house breathe. At dawn, the storm was gone. It left behind a world so bright it seemed innocent. The slope behind the house glittered under the first clean light. Pine branches bowed beneath white weight. The sky was a hard winter blue, pure enough to make a man suspicious of beauty. Jonah stood outside with his flannel sleeves rolled beneath his canvas coat, breath steaming in front of his face, and felt the old reflex of scanning for danger rise in him before he could stop it. Snow could hide anything. Tracks, cable boxes, A bad patch of ice. A road no longer where the road had been. Caleb came out behind him, carrying a thermos and a long metal probe. "No one touches the hatch until we check the vents," Caleb announced. Mara, wrapped in a dark parka and a burgundy scarf, looked up from Arthur's notes. "That is the most reassuring thing anyone has said since we arrived." Jonah glanced at the probe. "You expecting to find buried treasure? In houses built by retired radar men?" Caleb snorted. "I expect to find 4 kinds of bad judgment and 1 label maker." Talon sneezed into the snow. "See?" Caleb said. "Expert agrees." They began circling the house. The rear of the structure vanished into the mountainside, its stone and concrete half buried beneath drifts. To a stranger, it might have looked like a stubborn cabin. To Caleb, it was a diagram. He pointed out the way snow gathered unevenly near the retaining wall, the faint scalloped patterns where wind slipped around hidden openings, the narrow strips where ice had formed smoother than the surrounding crust. "Old underground rooms breathe," he said. "You heat the space inside, air wants out, cold air wants in. Most of the time, nobody notices, but after a storm, snow tells on everything." Mara crouched near a patch where the snow had thinned into a grayish crust. "Because warmth comes through?" "Sometimes. Sometimes it's pressure. Sometimes it's wind draw." Caleb tapped the snow lightly with the probe. Arthur would have known that. He didn't write, "Wait for 3 snows," because he was composing mountain poetry. "Arthur did not strike me as a poet," Mara said. "He was worse," Caleb replied. "An engineer with suspense." Jonah listened, his arms folded. The phrase from the will returned to him. The hatch beneath the living room must not be sealed again until snow has fallen 3 times. Last night, it had sounded like the sort of mystery men left behind when they no longer had to answer questions. Now, in daylight, it looked less like mystery and more like instruction. Arthur had not been trying to charm anyone. He had been hiding a safety manual inside a riddle. The first snow had shown little. The storm had covered everything too heavily, too recently. Caleb marked several possible vent lines with small orange flags he pulled from his truck. Mara photographed them with her phone, careful and methodical. Talon moved from point to point, nose low, sometimes losing interest, sometimes pausing with the intensity of a priest before an altar. Jonah watched the dog more than the snow. Talon did not understand old radar stations. He did not understand wills or legal conditions or defense contractors with soft hands. But he understood air, metal, damp, the faint difference between dead stone and a passage carrying scent from somewhere unseen. By afternoon, clouds gathered again. The second snow came gentler than the first, falling in wide, soft flakes that made the world seem temporarily forgiven. They waited it out inside. Caleb repaired a sticky latch in the mudroom because he claimed he could not sit still in a building full of unresolved hinges. Mara reviewed Arthur's letters by the fire. Jonah boiled water, burned toast, and accepted Caleb's diagnosis that his kitchen skills had been court-martialed before he was. The joke should have cut. It did, a little. But Caleb said it with such casual warmth that Jonah found himself giving a dry laugh instead of shutting down. That surprised him more than the hatch. Later, when the second snow stopped, Talon became restless. He stood from his place near the fireplace and went to the back door, not barking, only looking over his shoulder at Jonah with severe expectation. "Bathroom?" Jonah asked. Talon huffed. "Apparently not." They followed him outside. Jonah first, then Caleb, with the probe, Mara carrying Arthur's notebook in one gloved hand. The air had gone silver. Fresh snow lay over the earlier layer, smooth as icing on a cake no one in the house was cheerful enough to bake. Talon led them around the slope behind the house. He moved with focus now, head low, tail level. Near a cluster of dwarf pines and half-buried rock, he stopped. His nose worked along the base of the stones. Then he pawed at the snow, not wildly, but in short, deliberate strokes. A puff of powder flew up. Talon inhaled, got a noseful of ice dust, and sneezed so violently that Mara laughed before she could stop herself. Caleb grinned. "There you go. This house has more breathing holes than I do after coffee." Jonah knelt and cleared more snow with his gloved hands. Beneath the thin crust was a dark oval of metal mesh, half hidden by roots and stone. It was small, no wider than a dinner plate, but air moved through it. Not much, just enough to touch the back of Jonah's wrist like a cold animal. A vent, real, functional, hidden. Mara's laughter faded into something quieter. Arthur knew someone would need to find this. Or he knew someone would try to close what they didn't understand, Caleb said. Jonah looked at the vent, then back toward the house. The living room sat low and watchful against the slope. Beneath it, somewhere under stone and concrete, there was space enough for air to move. Space enough for a secret. For a moment, Jonah imagined Arthur Bellamy as a younger man, standing on this same slope with snow in his hair, calculating pressure, wind, and human cowardice. The old man had not left Jonah a comforting inheritance. He had left him a system, a puzzle built from weather, metal, and distrust. And beneath that puzzle, perhaps, an answer. They did not open the hatch until the next morning. Caleb insisted on daylight, ventilation, and not becoming a cautionary tale told to bored firefighters. He brought a portable gas meter from the station, 2 headlamps, a coil of rope, and a first aid kit large enough to make Mara raise an eyebrow. "Optimistic," she said. "Experienced," Caleb corrected. Jonah said little. He cleaned the edge of the metal plate with a wire brush, working slowly, sleeves rolled to his elbows, despite the cold. Talon stood close, watching every scrape as if supervising a recruit. Mara laid a plastic sheet on the floor and arranged evidence bags, labels, gloves, and her camera. She did not call it evidence yet, but her hands moved as if the room already had witnesses. The hatch had no obvious handle. Arthur naturally had concealed the release beneath a narrow strip of floor stone beside the hearth. Caleb found it after 10 minutes and announced that Arthur was the reason normal people drink. With a heavy click, the seal loosened. Jonah gripped the edge and lifted. Cold air rose from below. It carried the smell of dust, old paper, dry metal, and something faintly sharp, ozone perhaps, or the ghost of machines that had once listened to the sky. A narrow steel stairway descended into darkness. No one spoke. The silence had weight. Jonah turned on his headlamp. The beam cut down the stairs, catching railings, rivets, and the first curve of a concrete wall below. "I go first," he said. Mara opened her mouth. "No argument," Jonah added. "I was only going to say take this." She handed him a small camera. "Film continuously if you can, and don't touch documents with bare hands." Caleb clipped the gas meter to Jonah's belt. "If that chirps, you come back up. If the stairs feel wrong, you come back up. If you see a skeleton wearing a lab coat, you definitely come back up because I am too old for government ghosts." "There are no ghosts," Jonah said. Caleb looked around Arthur's living room. That is a brave statement in this architectural decision. Talon pressed forward. Jonah looked down. "You stay close." The dog's expression suggested that had never been in question. They descended. The stairs were narrow, steel and cold under Jonah's boots. Each step answered with a muted ring. Talon moved beside him where the space allowed, claws ticking softly. Behind them, Mara followed with her headlamp and gloves. Caleb remained at the top, holding the rope and watching the meter readout, his humor left upstairs with the fire. The lower chamber emerged gradually from shadow. It was not a tomb. That almost disappointed the frightened part of Jonah, which had prepared for something dramatic enough to justify its dread. Instead, it was a room, a military technical room, forgotten but orderly. Concrete walls, conduit lines, a bank of old radar consoles with dark screens curved like blind eyes, metal cabinets, a map table, shelves of labeled binders, a reel-to-reel tape machine under a dust cover. Along one wall stood a row of fireproof file cabinets, each marked with letters and dates. At the far end, a desk waited beneath a canvas tarp. Mara exhaled slowly. Arthur. The name sounded different down there. Not family now, not memory. Presence. Jonah moved toward the desk. His boots stirred dust. The room seemed to listen to him, not with malice, but with the strained patience of something that had held its breath too long. On the desk, beneath the canvas, lay a tape recorder, a small stack of folders, and a reel labeled in Arthur's severe handwriting, "For Jonah, when the snow remembers." Jonah stared at it. His throat tightened before he understood why. Mara came beside him, careful not to touch the papers. "We should document before playing anything." Jonah nodded, though every nerve in him wanted sound. A voice, a reason, some human thread through the machinery and dust. They photographed the desk, the label, the folders, the cabinets. Mara's restraint irritated him and steadied him at once. She placed gloved fingers on the reel, examined it, then set it on the machine with the care of a woman handling not an object, but a delay between the dead and the living. The tape hissed. For a few seconds there was only static. Then Arthur Bellamy's voice entered the room. Thin, old, precise. "Jonah, if this is playing, the house has chosen inconvenience over silence. That is usually where truth begins." Caleb's voice drifted faintly from above. "That sounds like him." Jonah did not answer. Arthur continued. "I was a radar engineer when the world was busy pretending fear was strategy. In 1968, I discovered irregular transmissions linked to a liaison officer named Victor Vale. The official explanation was equipment drift. It was not equipment drift." The tape clicked softly as it turned. Arthur's voice did not tremble. It was weak from age, but not uncertain. He spoke of copied radar data, unofficial relays, sealed inquiries, and superiors who had decided that quiet was cheaper than accountability. He said Victor Vale's network had been buried, not broken. He said some secrets did not die. They changed letterhead. Mara's pen stopped moving. Jonah felt Talon lean against his leg. Then Arthur said the name. Northgate Strategic Solutions. The room seemed to grow colder around it. "In my last years, I found the Vale family's fingerprints in modern defense contracting, not direct at first. Shell companies, procurement channels, systems integration. Then tactical coordinate transmission packages. One of those packages intersected with your case." Jonah's hands curled. Arthur paused on the tape, breathing faintly. "I do not have enough to clear you. If I did, I would have sent it before my heart became an unreliable instrument. What I have are fragments, contract identifiers, names of engineers, path diagrams, time-stamped conflicts, questions no honest review should have ignored." The words struck harder because they did not rescue him. They did not say, "You are free." They said, "Keep digging." On the desk beside the recorder, Mara found the folders Arthur had mentioned. She opened the first, contract numbers, procurement notes, copied correspondence. The second held diagrams of data routes between field systems and contractor maintenance nodes. The third contained printouts of timestamp logs with several entries circled in red pencil. A few seconds. Here, 3 seconds. There, 7. Another line, 12. Jonah saw them before he understood that he had risen halfway from his chair. His eyes moved across the page, old training waking in him with cruel obedience. Transmission window, access lock, correction packet, secondary channel. His breath shortened. Not now, he told himself. But memory did not obey rank. A map lay beneath the logs, not Arthur's mountain map, a fire mission overlay, coordinates, grid lines, the sort of clean geometry that made chaos look manageable until men had to live inside the numbers. 3 names came back to Jonah: Mason, Ibarra, Kell. He did not speak them. He did not have to. They arrived in the room like candles going out one by one. The chamber narrowed. The air thickened. He heard voices that were not there, radios overlapping, someone asking for confirmation, someone else saying, "Wait, wait, that isn't—" Talon moved. The dog pressed his body hard against Jonah's leg, shoulder first, then ribcage, giving weight and warmth. His head pushed beneath Jonah's shaking hand. Not dramatic, not trained for theater. Trained by love, repetition, and long nights when Jonah's mind walked roads his body had left years ago. Jonah gripped the scarred fur near Talon's neck. Count the breaths. 1, Talon breathed in. 2, Talon breathed out. 3. The room returned by inches. Mara was watching, but not with pity. Her eyes were wet, perhaps from dust, perhaps not. She looked away at exactly the right moment, granting him privacy without abandoning him. "Jonah," she said softly, "we need to preserve all of this." He laughed once, bitter and breathless. "Of course we do." "I mean it. If this leaves the room wrong, if chain of custody is broken, if originals are contaminated, Northgate will bury it before it reaches daylight." He hated that she was right. A shell could travel fast. A lie could travel faster. But justice, apparently, needed gloves, labels, photographs, duplicate storage, and a woman with a satchel who refused to let grief mishandle evidence. Jonah sat slowly in the chair behind Arthur's desk. The old cushion released a sigh of dust. He placed one hand on Talon's head. The dog stayed pressed to him, amber eyes fixed on nothing visible. On the tape, Arthur's voice continued, softer now. "If you are angry, good. Anger is a match. Do not mistake it for a lantern." Jonah closed his eyes. Above them, beyond concrete and steel, the winter sun shone over the mountain. Snow lay bright on the roof. The house leaned into stone, breathing through hidden vents, holding its dead man's voice in a room of blind machines. Jonah did not feel saved. That would have been too easy, and Arthur Bellamy, even in death, did not appear to believe in easy. But in the buried chamber beneath the hearth, among dead consoles and labeled fragments, something long sealed shifted by the smallest measure. The truth had not broken free. Not yet. But it had taken its first breath. In the days that followed, Arthur Bellamy's mountain house stopped feeling like a house. It became something stranger. Above ground, the living room glowed with winter fire. Logs cracked inside the round concrete hearth, sending soft amber light across the stone floor. Mara's papers spread over the table in careful stacks, each stack labeled with blue tape, yellow tabs, and a sternness that made even Caleb lower his voice around them. Caleb called her coffee legal-grade exorcism fluid, then drank 2 cups of it because, as he explained, fear and caffeine were cousins, and he preferred to keep family close. Talon took the best place before the hearth and occupied it with the solemn entitlement of an old general. Below ground, the bunker waited. Jonah went down each morning after the house warmed. He wore his red and black flannel with the sleeves rolled high, the army green shirt beneath it, darkened at the collar from sweat despite the cold. The old dog tag stayed hidden under the cloth. Talon followed him down the steel stairs, his claws ticking on each step, scarred, ear-crooked, eyes watchful. The room beneath the hearth had the stillness of a buried mind. Radar consoles stared with dead screens. Tape reels sat in ordered rows. Filing cabinets stood against the walls like iron witnesses who had waited decades to be questioned properly. Mara had rules. No bare hands on documents. No moving folders without photographs. No reading ahead without logging the original position. No, just checking something, unless that something was numbered, bagged, and witnessed. Jonah hated the rules. He also understood them. A careless man could ruin truth as surely as a dishonest one. On the third day, Mara made the call. Special Agent Naomi Kessler arrived near noon in a government vehicle that looked too clean for the mountain road and too practical to be vanity. She stepped out beneath a pale sky with a black coat buttoned to her throat, dark hair pulled back, and a face composed of angles, restraint, and sleep sacrificed to other people's secrets. She was 47, though the stillness around her made age seem irrelevant. Some people entered a room asking to be trusted. Naomi entered as if trust were an unnecessary decoration. She showed her identification to Mara first, then to Jonah, not quickly, not theatrically. Jonah looked at the badge, then at her. "You read my file," he said. "Yes." "All of it?" "The official record, the appeal documents, several redacted summaries, enough to know I should not form an opinion yet." That should have irritated him. It did. But not as much as false sympathy would have. Naomi looked past him at Talon. The dog stood near Jonah's left knee, neither friendly nor hostile. "Military working dog?" "Former scout dog," Jonah said. "Retired." Talon huffed as though retirement had been imposed upon him by lesser minds. Naomi inclined her head. Understood. That single word won her more ground with Jonah than any apology could have. She toured the bunker without touching anything at first. Mara walked beside her, explaining what they had found. Caleb remained near the stairs with his gas meter and flashlight, looking unusually quiet. Naomi listened, asked short questions, and photographed labels, seals, dust patterns, file locations, power conduits, tape equipment, vent lines. When she finally spoke at length, it was beside Arthur's desk. "If this data is valid," she said, "it will create its own weight. Our job is not to make it sound dramatic. Our job is to keep mistakes from making it lighter." Jonah leaned against a filing cabinet. "You say that like truth is a piece of metal." "In court, sometimes it is." Naomi looked at him. "And sometimes people drop it on their own foot before anyone else gets the chance." Caleb coughed once into his glove. Mara did not smile, but one corner of her mouth considered rebellion. Naomi began the process. Originals were sealed, copies were scanned. The tape reels were cataloged. The fireproof cabinets were opened one by one under camera recording. Arthur's handwritten notes were placed beside printed contract pages, old radar diagrams, procurement chains, and lists of companies whose names changed every few years, but whose directors seemed to orbit the same quiet family. Vale. It appeared first in the old files. Victor Vale, Liaison Officer, 1968. Irregular transmission reviews, equipment drift explanations. Inquiry closed without public action. Then it appeared again, wearing modern clothes. Vale Holdings, Vale Meridian Group, Northgate Strategic Solutions. Layer by layer, the buried thing took form. The first layer belonged to Arthur's past. Radar data quietly moved through unofficial channels during the Cold War, then hidden because the embarrassment of exposure frightened men more than the betrayal itself. The second layer belonged to the decades after. Family assets, shell firms, private security consulting, defense procurement, systems integration. A snake did not have to remain in the same skin to remain a snake. The third layer reached Jonah. Northgate had supplied a synchronization module used in tactical coordinate transmission packages. The same family shadow that Arthur had chased through old radar logs had touched the system that condemned Jonah Sterling. Jonah did not speak when he saw it. He stood over the table as Naomi projected scanned files onto a portable screen. Mara sat with a notebook, writing in small, quick lines. Caleb leaned in from the side, squinting at the diagrams as if bad wiring had personally offended him. Talon lay under the table, his head on Jonah's boot. Naomi highlighted a series of timestamps. "Here," she said. "Primary log shows Sterling access at 21:47. Correction packet transmitted through auxiliary channel at 21:48. Access confirmation attached to his authentication trail." Jonah's jaw tightened. He had heard the prosecution say it so many times that the sequence had become a curse with numbers. Naomi clicked to another file. "This is a secondary synchronization record copied from Arthur's archive. It appears to show a server drift correction at 21:51, but the auxiliary channel packet is mirrored after Sterling's access lockout." Mara looked up. "After?" 3 minutes and 16 seconds after. The bunker seemed to still around the number. To anyone else, 3 minutes and 16 seconds might have been nothing. A delay in a system, dust on a clock, a harmless mismatch buried inside technical noise. To Jonah, it was thunder under ice. He reached for the edge of the table. Talon lifted his head. Naomi noticed, but did not stop. "This alone does not clear you. We need to verify the source device, confirm the integrity of Arthur's copy, locate the original maintenance path, and identify who had administrative access." "Northgate," Jonah said. "Possibly." "Not possibly." Naomi's eyes met his. "Mr. Sterling, certainty without admissibility is just anger with better posture." The words hit him hard enough to make Mara look up. For a moment, Jonah wanted to snap at her. He wanted to tell this neat federal woman with her careful coat and clean language what it felt like to have strangers turn his life into a file. He wanted to ask where admissibility had been when his own words were twisted into rope. But Talon pressed his muzzle against Jonah's hand. A small pressure, warm, insistent. Jonah breathed once, then again. Naomi waited, not impatiently, not kindly. Simply waited. That was when he understood something about her. She did not trust him yet, but she was not using distrust as a weapon. She was using it as a tool. A level, a measuring line, cold perhaps, but straight. He let go of the table. "Then let's make it admissible," he said. Naomi nodded once. The work continued. By evening, the bunker had become a hive of low voices, printer hum, camera clicks, and the dry whisper of old paper entering new light. Arthur's fragments did not form a miracle. They formed a trail. Contract numbers pointed to procurement offices. Maintenance logs pointed to Northgate technicians. One name appeared more than once in the system updates after Jonah's case: Darren Pike. Naomi read the name aloud. "Mid-level data engineer," she said. "Northgate Systems Division, signed off on several update packages tied to auxiliary synchronization." Mara leaned back. If he handled the maintenance keys, he may know whether the logs were altered. "Or he may have altered them," Caleb said. "Or he may have been told not to ask why the alteration existed." Naomi's voice remained level. Jonah looked at the name on the page. Darren Pike, not a colonel, not a CEO. Not a man who gave speeches about national security. Just a technician's name in a chain of entries, small enough to disappear, important enough to hold a door shut. Mara closed a folder carefully. "Can you reach him?" Naomi did not answer immediately. "I can try through official channels, but if Northgate knows this room is open, he may be under pressure already." The words settled over them like new snow. If Northgate knows. Jonah looked toward the ceiling. Above them, firelight would be moving across the living room. The windows would be black now, reflecting the inside back at itself. The mountain would be silent. But silence, he had learned, was not the same as safety. Far away, Northgate's Strategic Solutions was not silent. Gideon Vale stood at the head of a glass conference table in a Denver office 30 floors above the street. Beyond the windows, the city lights shimmered beneath winter haze. Around him sat men and women in excellent suits, their faces lit by screens, their water glasses untouched. No one raised their voice. That was what made the room feel dangerous. Gideon placed Arthur Bellamy's property file on the table. "The Bellamy site is now an active risk asset," he said. One executive shifted. "The estate holder is cooperating with outside counsel?" "With counsel," Gideon said, "and possibly federal interest." The room tightened by degrees. A woman from compliance cleared her throat. "Do we know what was accessed?" Gideon looked at her until she regretted the question. "If we knew, it would not be a risk." Another man asked, "Sterling?" Gideon's mouth curved faintly. "An emotional variable, useful once, unstable now." No one said the word innocent. No one said the word guilty. In Gideon Vale's world, those words belonged to sermons, newspapers, and grieving families. Useful for public weather, not for navigation. "Information," he said softly, "has always belonged to those disciplined enough to hold it. My grandfather understood that. Arthur Bellamy did not. He mistook preservation for virtue." He tapped the file once. "We will stabilize the situation." The phrase entered the air clean and bloodless. Back on the mountain, Jonah did not know those words had been spoken, but he felt their approach the way old soldiers felt a change in wind. That night, sleep did not come easily. Mara stayed up in the kitchen with Naomi, both women surrounded by documents, speaking in low voices about custody logs, warrant thresholds, and digital verification. Caleb fell asleep in a chair with his hat over his face, snoring softly until Talon stared at him long enough to make him wake and mutter an apology to General Dog. Jonah sat near the fireplace. The third snow had begun outside. It fell softly at first, then thickened, covering the old tracks, smoothing the marks where they had circled the house, wrapping the roof and pines in white silence. The world looked holy. That was the trouble with snow. It could make anything look forgiven before the truth was finished speaking. On the table before Jonah lay a printed copy of the timestamp conflict. 3 minutes and 16 seconds. He stared at it until the numbers blurred. Then came the old images. The hearing room. Colonel Harlan's folded hands. Claire's face turned slightly away, not cruel, only broken in a way that had still broken him. The names of the 3 men gone. Mason laughing over terrible instant coffee. Ibarra humming off-key near the comms tent. Kell writing letters he never mailed. Jonah's fingers began to shake. He hid the hand beneath the table. Talon saw, anyway. The dog rose from the hearth, picked up his empty bowl in his teeth, and pushed it with grave determination against Jonah's boot. Jonah blinked down at him. The absurdity was so complete that for 1 second the past lost its grip. Caleb opened one eye from the chair. "Even the dog thinks you need retraining." Mara looked over, and this time she did smile. Naomi, after a pause, said, "He may be the most qualified member of this team." Talon set the bowl down and sneezed, accepting the promotion. Jonah laughed. It came out rough, reluctant, and short, but it was real enough to warm the room by a degree no thermometer would admit. He stood, found food for Talon, and then, under the combined judgment of dog, lawyer, federal agent, and mountain handyman, made himself eat a bowl of stew as well. Later, when the house quieted, Jonah returned to the window. Snow fell over Arthur's mountain in deep white curtains. Beneath the floor, the bunker held its files. On the table, the stolen minutes waited to be weighed. Somewhere below the mountain or beyond it, Northgate would be moving. Somewhere in the past, Arthur Bellamy had carried a match through decades of dark and left it for him. Jonah placed the brass compass on the windowsill. Its needle trembled, then found north. He understood then that Arthur had not left him treasure. He had left him a final march. Not toward revenge. Revenge was too small for the dead and too hungry for the living. This march was slower, colder, harder. to carry truth through winter without dropping it. Behind him, Talon settled before the fire, one scarred ear lifted even in sleep. Outside, the third snow kept falling, bright and silent, covering the mountain like a clean page waiting for the first honest line. The third snow began in beauty. That was the insult of it. Morning light passed through a high veil of cloud and turned each falling flake into a silver ash, bright and weightless, as if the mountain were performing some ancient ceremony over the house. The pines stood in white robes. The roof of Arthur Bellamy's buried home shone softly beneath the sky. Even the narrow windows seemed less suspicious for a while, their dark glass catching pale fire. Inside, no one trusted the beauty. Naomi Kessler had been awake since before dawn, seated at Arthur's kitchen table with her coat still on, sorting duplicate drives, sealed evidence bags, and printed custody logs into separate waterproof cases. Her face showed no fear, only increased precision. Mara moved beside her, labeling everything twice, her handwriting smaller than usual. The bitter coffee between them had gone cold, which Caleb would have called an offense against the living if he had been there to witness it. Caleb had left before sunrise to check the avalanche point and the weather station below the ridge. He had promised to return within an hour. That had been nearly 3. Jonah stood near the fireplace, his flannel sleeves rolled up as if his body still expected labor to solve dread. His dog tags rested under his army green shirt, cold against his chest. On the floor, Talon would not settle. The German shepherd paced from the hearth to the front door, then to the edge of the old rug, then back to the window facing the road. He sniffed the door seam, sniffed the floor, stood still with his scarred left ear tilted and his right ear raised high. The third time he did it, Jonah stopped pretending not to notice. "What do you have?" he asked softly. Talon did not look at him. He looked at the road. Beyond the glass, snow was already erasing the tire tracks from Caleb's truck. Naomi zipped one of the evidence cases closed. "We should move before visibility drops further." Mara checked her phone. No signal. "Mine's out again." "Mine too," Jonah said. Naomi reached for her radio. Static answered, thin and dry. The house gave a faint pop somewhere in the walls, an ordinary cold weather sound that made everyone look up. Then the landline rang. No one moved for the first ring. Arthur's old internal phone sat on a small shelf near the hallway, black, square, and ugly enough to have survived several governments. It had not rung once since they arrived. On the second ring, Talon growled. Naomi stood. "Don't answer yet." The phone rang again. Jonah walked to it. Mara said, "Jonah." He looked back. "If he can reach this line, I want to know how." Naomi's expression tightened, but she did not stop him. Jonah lifted the receiver. For a breath, there was only the soft rush of distance. Then Gideon Vale's voice entered the house as if he had been standing in the next room all along. "Mr. Sterling, I hope the mountain has not been too unforgiving." Jonah's fingers tightened around the receiver. "You always call before breakfast, or is today special?" A faint pause. Gideon did not enjoy being treated like weather. "I prefer conversations before circumstances limit them." Naomi moved closer, signaling for silence. Mara quietly opened her notebook. Talon stood beside Jonah, body rigid. "You're done buying," Jonah said. "I am offering relief." Funny word. A correct one. You have suffered public humiliation, financial collapse, institutional failure. You have been used poorly by people who should have protected you. I am not unsympathetic. Jonah looked out at the snow. "That must be painful for you." Gideon's voice remained smooth. "Arthur Bellamy's files will not give you back the life you lost. They will not restore the dead. They will not undo what your former wife believed. At best, they will drag you through another public process, another set of questions, another room full of strangers deciding what your pain is worth." The words found their marks because they were not entirely false. That was Gideon's talent. He did not throw lies like stones. He wrapped them around pieces of truth until they fit the hand. "We can pay you enough to leave Colorado," Gideon continued. "You and the dog, a warm house, medical care for him, privacy, no more bus stations, no more old men's ghosts." Talon's growl deepened. Then Gideon said gently, "That animal deserves a bed, Mr. Sterling, not a frozen grave beneath a paranoid engineer's living room." The room narrowed. Jonah turned toward the door before thought arrived. His body chose forward, as it had been taught to do in every old emergency. Move toward the threat, close distance, take ground. Fury flashed clean through him, almost welcome after days of cold control. Talon blocked him. The dog moved across Jonah's path and planted himself between Jonah and the front hall. His eyes locked on Jonah's face. His lips drew back just enough to show teeth, not at an enemy outside, but at the man he loved too much to let him become one more body thrown at winter. Jonah stared down at him. Talon caught his sleeve in his teeth and pulled. Not hard. Enough. The old reflex broke. 8 seconds, Jonah thought. A working dog did not need theology. He knew survival in increments. "Hold the man 8 more seconds. Let the fire pass. Let the living choose again." Jonah released a breath he had not known he was holding. Into the phone, Gideon said, "Mr. Sterling?" Jonah looked away from Talon only when he could trust his own hands. "You don't get to say what he deserves," he said. Then he hung up. The silence after the call was worse than the ringing. Naomi was already moving. "We leave now." A heavy mechanical thud sounded from outside. Then another. The front door shuddered in its frame. Mara went pale. What was that? Naomi crossed to the window, but stayed back from the glass. Through the white sweep of snow, shapes moved near the entry path. 2 figures in winter utility gear, faces shielded by hoods and goggles. A white service truck sat near the road with amber lights flashing. On its side, a magnetic sign read, "Mountain Environmental Safety." Jonah had seen enough fake authority in his life to recognize how neatly it dressed. Another thud. The lock mechanism jolted. Naomi's jaw tightened. "They're securing the exterior." "Can they do that?" Mara asked. "With equipment, yes. Legally, no." From the kitchen came a brief electrical snap. The lights flickered once, twice, then dropped into emergency red from the low backup strips Arthur had installed along the baseboards. Caleb's voice crackled suddenly through Naomi's radio, broken by static. "Kessler? Jonah? You reading? Road's blocked below the bend. Service truck says mechanical failure. That's not a failure. Repeat, not..." Static swallowed him. Naomi tried to respond. "Caleb? Status?" Nothing. Jonah moved to the side window. Through the storm, he saw one of the suited figures near the generator housing. A moment later, the steady hum of the backup unit faltered. "Generator's gone," he said. Mara gathered the sealed cases. "We have the duplicates." Naomi checked her sidearm without drawing it, then stopped herself. "No confrontation unless forced. Their plan depends on making this look like weather and structural failure." Another sound came from below, a muffled hiss. Jonah knew immediately where it came from. The hatch. They ran to the living room. Cold had begun to creep up through the floor, and around the hatch seam, a pale expanding foam pushed inward in ugly ridges. Whoever stood outside or below the vent access was sealing gaps under the pretense of containment. Safety foam, contractor grade. Clean, plausible, deadly in the right report. Mara's hands trembled as she set one evidence case on the table. "They're sealing us in." Naomi's voice sharpened. "Not if we keep moving." The house changed over the next 20 minutes, its warmth drained by degrees. The walls no longer seemed protective. They seemed to listen helplessly as their own mouth was covered. The fireplace still burned, but the draft had altered. Smoke hesitated before rising, then found the flue in uneven pulls. Naomi tried the radio again. Static. Mara checked every phone. Nothing. Jonah tested the front door. It did not give. Above them, the storm thickened until the windows became white rectangles. Talon paced in short, hard lines, nose low, then suddenly darted to the hatch. He barked once. Not panic. Command. Jonah looked at Naomi. We go down. That may be exactly what they want. They're sealing around it from above. If Arthur left another breath in this house, it's below. Mara lifted a flashlight with both shaking hands. Then we find it carefully. They descended into the bunker under red emergency light. The old radar room had never felt friendly, but now it felt awake in a harsher way. Their breath showed white. Frost gathered along one conduit near the wall. Talon went ahead, not toward Arthur's desk this time, not toward the file cabinets, but along the bank of dead consoles. He stopped at a rusted maintenance panel behind the largest radar unit. His nose pressed to the seam. He scratched. Jonah knelt beside him. Air? Talon scratched again. Caleb's earlier words came back. Old underground rooms, breathe. Jonah wedged his fingers under the panel edge. It resisted. Naomi handed him a pry bar from Caleb's kit. The panel gave with a metallic groan. Behind it was a narrow service cavity, black and cold. A faint stream of air touched Jonah's face. Fresh air. Not much, but alive. Inside the cavity, an old cable ran upward through a pipe alongside a ventilation duct, barely large enough for a dog. A faded tag hung from the cable, Arthur's handwriting still visible beneath dust. Reflector line. Ridge array. Naomi leaned in with her flashlight. Can we transmit through that? Jonah's mind began assembling pieces faster than fear could scatter them. Old antenna, ridge reflector, emergency power, signal distortion through storm. Not much range. Maybe enough. Maybe, he said, if the line isn't broken. Mara looked at the duct, then at Talon. No, Jonah said immediately. No one had spoken the suggestion aloud. Talon had already stepped forward. The duct was too tight for a human. Talon might fit into the first section, perhaps to the junction where the cable had sagged away from its guide. If the cable could be pulled forward, Jonah could patch it into the old transmitter unit Naomi had been using for scans. He hated the thought so violently that for one moment he preferred the cold. Jonah had sent men forward before. He had watched maps swallow names. He had lived with the arithmetic of distance and risk until it became a language he despised. Not Talon, not into the dark. The dog looked back at him. Snow hissed somewhere above. The house groaned. Mara stood holding the flashlight, face drawn but steady. Naomi waited with the discipline of someone who knew the cruelty of necessary choices. Jonah crouched in front of Talon. Listen to me, he whispered, though the dog needed no speech. You go only as far as the harness lets you. You hear me? Only as far as the line. Talon pressed his forehead briefly into Jonah's chest. It was not obedience, it was trust, which was heavier. Jonah clipped a thin signal wire and a guide cord to Talon's black harness. His hands moved carefully, but his throat ached. The old tag on Talon's collar gave a soft metallic click against the buckle. Once, long ago, Jonah had thought courage meant going first. Now, kneeling on a cold bunker floor, he learned courage could mean letting the one creature that still believed in him disappear into a place he could not follow. Talon entered the duct. His shoulders compressed. His claws scraped metal. The guide cord slid through Jonah's gloved hands. Easy, Jonah murmured. Easy. Talon pushed forward inch by inch. The wire moved. Naomi positioned the transmitter near the open panel. Mara angled the light, her fingers white around the flashlight. Jonah watched the cord, feeling every vibration as if it were tied around his ribs. Then the cord stopped. For one terrible second, no one breathed. From inside the duct came a muffled snort, then a bark, one short, irritated bark, full of life and complaint. Jonah nearly laughed and nearly broke at the same time. The wire jerked free. "Got it," Naomi said. She worked fast, stripping the old line, connecting the signal lead, adjusting the emergency frequency Arthur had scribbled in the maintenance binder. Jonah fed power from a backup cell. The unit coughed static. Naomi turned the dial. The signal whined, thin and ugly. "Caleb," she said into the handset. "Kessler to Rourke. If you can read any part of this, respond." Nothing. Only the storm. Jonah held the evidence case against his chest with one arm and the guide cord with the other. Mara whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a legal objection. Naomi tried again. "Rourke, this is Kessler. Bellamy House is compromised. We need emergency assistance. Signal via ridge reflector line. Do you copy?" Static cracked. Then a voice, faint as a candle seen through snow. "Copy. Barely. Say again." "Caleb." Mara closed her eyes. Naomi did not waste a syllable. "Road blocked. House sealed. Generator disabled. Evidence secured. Request emergency winter support through guard unit at Avalanche Point." Caleb's reply broke apart, returned, vanished, then came through in pieces. "Understood. I knew Arthur's cursed Tin Mountain would call someday. Hold position. I'm relaying now." The signal dipped. From the duct came Talon's bark again, farther away now, echoing up through the metal throat of the mountain. Jonah lowered his forehead to the cold edge of the panel. The bark was not grand. It was hoarse, stubborn, and deeply annoyed. It was the most beautiful sound Jonah had ever heard. The red emergency lights blinked overhead. Breath fogged the bunker air. Mara secured the last evidence case with shaking hands. Naomi kept the transmitter alive. Somewhere outside, the third snow kept falling, covering tire tracks, service trucks, lies, and the narrow road to town. Jonah held the sealed files tight against his chest. For years he had prayed for his name to be cleared. Now, in the belly of Arthur's house, with cold creeping through the concrete and Talon's voice ringing through an old ventilation line, the prayer changed. "Not clear me. Not yet. Let me live long enough to carry this out. Let the truth survive the snow." Rescue did not arrive like cavalry. It came slowly, with engines straining in low gear, tires chewing snow, amber lights turning through the white storm like tired stars. It came with men and women hunched against the wind, faces red from cold, gloves stiff around tools, radios crackling with half-swallowed words. It came the way most mercy came in the real world, late, imperfect, and carried by people who were already exhausted but kept moving anyway. Caleb Rourke rode in the lead vehicle, one hand gripping the dash, the other pointing through the windshield toward the dark shoulder of the mountain. "There!" he shouted over the engine and wind. "Not the main door, the ridge vent. Follow the melt line." A young winter response driver leaned forward, squinting through blowing snow. "I don't see a line." "You're looking for what the snow refuses to keep," Caleb said. "Arthur's house breathes through stone. Watch the patches under the dwarf pines." The driver gave him a look that said, "Old mountain men should come with subtitles," but he steered where Caleb pointed. Behind them crawled a second vehicle from the guard support team assigned to the Avalanche Point. No one had come expecting a dramatic operation. They had come because Caleb's emergency relay carried enough official weight. Naomi Kessler's broken transmission carried enough urgency. And the mountain itself was already in one of those moods where small mistakes became final quickly. The fake service truck still sat down the road, amber light blinking in the snow. Its driver was gone. One of the responders photographed it, while another marked the tire tracks. Caleb saw the magnetic sign on the side and spat into the snow. Environmental safety, he muttered. I've cleaned trout smarter than that lie. Higher up, the house had almost vanished into the storm. Its low roof was a white mound. Its narrow windows were dim. It looked less like a home now than a buried animal with its mouth held shut. Then came the sound. A bark. Faint, hoarse, and furious. Caleb stopped walking. There, he said. Again, the bark came through the snow, not from the house door, not from the chimney, but from somewhere along the ridge where rock and pine tangled together under ice. Talon. Caleb moved faster than his knees appreciated. He led the team along the slope, probing before each step. Beneath the dwarf pines, the snow looked wrong, thinner in a crooked oval, glazed at the edge where hidden warmth had licked upward and frozen again. A vent cover lay beneath packed ice and roots, half hidden the way Arthur had always hidden useful things, badly enough to be found by the right person, well enough to irritate everyone else. The bark struck again from below. One of the responders knelt with a pry tool. Another brushed snow away by hand. Caleb held his flashlight steady, jaw tight. "Easy," he said. "There's a dog in the line." The metal cover resisted at first. Ice had sealed its edges. The team worked without shouting, just short commands and breath. Pry, hold, clear. Again. The cover shifted with a shriek of frozen metal. Cold air burst upward, sharp and ancient, as if the mountain had been holding a grudge. Then Talon came out. He did not emerge gracefully. He exploded from the opening in a storm of snow, black and gold fur clumped with frost, scarred left ear flattened, right ear standing with offended dignity. For one wild second he looked like an old wolf from a story told beside firelight, sent by some winter god to judge whether humans had made enough bad decisions for one day. He shook himself hard, showering Caleb and two responders with snow. "Good to see you too, General Dog," Caleb gasped. Talon ignored him. He turned back toward the vent and barked once into the opening, as if issuing instructions to everyone still trapped below. Inside the bunker, Jonah heard the bark change. Not distant now. Near. His head came up. "They found him," Mara whispered. Naomi, crouched by the transmitter with one gloved hand on the old cable, closed her eyes for 1 second. Only one. Then the discipline returned. "Keep the evidence cases sealed. We move when they open access." The bunker had become bitterly cold. Red emergency lights blinked along the walls. Frost edged the conduit near the service panel. Mara's lips had gone pale, but her hands remained wrapped around the waterproof evidence case as if it held something breathing. Jonah sat near the open maintenance cavity, one arm across the files, the guide cord still looped around his wrist. He had kept hold of it even after Talon reached the ridge vent. A foolish thing, maybe. A human thing. Metal groaned above them. Voices filtered down through the ventilation line. Then Caleb's voice, cracked by distance and cold. "Jonah, you alive down there?" Jonah stared up at the black duct. "Unfortunately for your peace and quiet," he called. Caleb's laugh came back ragged. "That's the sweetest insult I've heard all week." The responders widened the vent enough to pass down a thermal blanket, then a radio relay cable, then instructions. The main hatch inside the house was compromised by foam and exterior locking equipment, but the ridge vent and maintenance passage could provide enough access to stabilize the air and guide them out through the bunker stairs once the front door was freed. Nothing happened quickly. That was the part no story liked to admit. Rescue was not one clean pull from darkness into sunlight. It was 40 minutes of cutting, bracing, checking air, clearing foam, communicating through static, and waiting while cold crept into bones and patience frayed. Jonah wanted to move. Naomi made him wait. Mara wanted to carry everything herself. Naomi made her divide the load. Caleb argued with a latch, lost, insulted Arthur's engineering, tried again, and won. At last the front door was open from outside. Cold and light entered the house together. Jonah came up the stairs from the bunker with Mara ahead of him and Naomi behind him, each carrying sealed evidence. The living room looked wounded, foam crusted near the hatch seam, the backup lights still red, the fireplace nearly out. But it was standing. Arthur's old house, stubborn as a stone saint, had not surrendered them. Jonah stepped through the door into the storm. Talon hit him like weather. The dog bounded through the snow and crashed into Jonah's legs, nearly taking him down. Jonah dropped to one knee and caught him with both arms. Talon was wet, freezing, furious, alive. His tag clicked against Jonah's dog tags beneath the flannel. Jonah buried his face in the rough fur near the scarred ear. "You always have to be the hero before I get a chance," he said, voice raw. Talon sneezed directly into his face. For a heartbeat, everything wholly became ridiculous. Jonah laughed with his eyes closed, and the sound broke something in him that had needed breaking. Around them, responders pretended not to watch. Caleb did not bother pretending. "Touching," he said. "Unsanitary, but touching." Naomi was already working. The moment everyone was accounted for, she shifted from survivor to investigator with the cold grace of a blade returning to its sheath. She photographed the exterior locks, the false service truck, the disabled generator housing, the foam around the hatch, the altered vent cover, the emergency signal line, the road blockage below the bend. Each detail received a number, a time, a witness. "This is no longer a technical misunderstanding," she said to one of the responding officers. "This is a coordinated interference event involving federal evidence." The man nodded, suddenly standing straighter. Mara stood near the door holding the evidence case against her coat. She looked older than she had that morning, and lighter somehow, as if terror had burned away a layer of unnecessary politeness. Jonah watched Naomi mark the scene and felt no triumph. Only a careful emptiness. Northgate had tried to turn weather into a document, tried to turn them into a report, accident, old structure, isolated site, unfortunate conditions. But too many eyes had arrived before the lie could dry. By nightfall, the house was filled with official presence, not crowded, but occupied by witness. Federal personnel arrived through the storm break. The Guard support team documented the rescue route. Naomi's field office established a secure evidence chain from Arthur's bunker to transport cases. Caleb stood by the hearth with a blanket around his shoulders, telling anyone who would listen that he had never trusted a man whose boots were cleaner than his conscience. Somewhere in Denver, Gideon Vale began denying. He denied sending anyone to Arthur Bellamy's property. He denied knowledge of the service truck. He denied directing interference with a federal inquiry. He denied familiarity with the old internal phone line. His statements were polished, precise, and almost beautiful in their emptiness. But Northgate had seams. Every system did. Darren Pike found his. He was not a brave man at first. Brave men were rare and often louder in memory than in life. Darren was 38, narrow-shouldered, with tired eyes made worse by too much screen light and too many nights telling himself that responsibility belonged above his pay grade. He had a mortgage, a daughter in college, a wife who thought his job involved cybersecurity and dull meetings, not the quiet rearrangement of other people's futures. He had signed maintenance packages because his supervisor told him the edits were authorized. He had ignored irregular access logs because the company said they were legacy artifacts. He had seen Jonah Sterling's name in the system and looked away because names on screens did not breathe. Then he heard about the Bellamy house. Not officially. Northgate was too careful for that. But whispers traveled through internal channels. Mountain site contained, exposure managed, environmental incident pending. Darren saw a flag data purge request tied to the old Sterling case. He saw Gideon's authorization key attached to a sealed instruction bundle. He saw in one incident report draft the phrase, "No surviving claimants expected to contest technical cause." That phrase followed him into the restroom, into the elevator, into his car. into the dark parking garage where he sat with both hands on the steering wheel and could not make himself drive home. No surviving claimants, not files, not variables. People. By midnight, Naomi received a secure message through an attorney contact. Darren Pike wanted to talk. He did not want immunity promised in fairy tale language. He did not ask to be called a hero. He asked whether it was too late to stop being a coward. Naomi's answer was brief. No. But it is late enough that you should bring everything. 2 days later, under formal protection, Darren provided the first key, then another. Administrative access logs, maintenance credentials, internal Northgate messages, a checksum record showing that the coordinate packet tied to Jonah's authentication trail had been mirrored through an auxiliary channel after Jonah's operational access was locked. A routing note connecting the post-incident cleanup to Northgate Systems Division. A communication thread referencing Colonel Wade Harlan's office. The lie did not collapse all at once. It cracked like lake ice. First one line, then another. Then the sound beneath everything changed. News began to move cautiously at first. A reopened military review, federal scrutiny of a defense contractor, questions surrounding a years-old artillery data case. No headline restored Jonah's life. No broadcast gave back the winters under awnings or the silence after Claire left. Still, messages began to arrive. Former soldiers, old acquaintances, men who had not spoken his name in years. Some wrote too much. Some wrote only, "I didn't know." One wrote, "I should have." Jonah read none of them for long. Then Mara brought him the letter. It came in a cream envelope, handwriting slanted slightly to the right. Claire Whitcomb. Jonah stood by the narrow window of Arthur's living room while afternoon sun struck the melting snow outside. Talon rested against his shin, still tired from the vent ordeal, but unwilling to be more than 3 feet away from him. The house smelled of smoke, damp wool, coffee, and cold stone, warming slowly. He opened the letter with his thumb. Claire did not ask to come back. That was the first mercy. She did not tell him she had suffered too, though he knew she had. She did not use grief as a ladder to stand beside him. She wrote that after the hearing, the noise had been too loud. Funerals, families, uniformed men speaking in careful tones, reporters hungry for one simple villain, her own relatives telling her that loyalty to the dead meant turning away from him. She wrote that her sentence, spoken once through tears, "I don't know who he is anymore," had become something harsher in other mouths. But she did not hide behind that. Silence, she wrote, had been a choice too. A frightened one, a human one, a wrong one. "I let my pain stand with the lie," she wrote. "I am sorry, Jonah, not because the truth is finally coming out, but because you deserved someone to ask harder questions before it did." Jonah read the line twice. Talon placed his head on Jonah's boot. No pressure, no command, just presence. Jonah did not tear the letter. He did not press it to his chest. He folded it carefully and set it on Arthur's table beside the brass compass. There were wounds that did not need to close in front of an audience to prove they had begun to heal. That evening, Naomi found him on the porch. The storm had passed. The ridge lay blue and gold beneath a clearing sky. From several hidden vents along the slope, faint ribbons of vapor rose into the cold like the house was exhaling after holding its breath for 30 years. Naomi stood beside him with her hands in her coat pockets. "We have enough," she said. Jonah looked at her. To request formal vacatur review of the old conviction, to open a criminal investigation into Northgate's interference, to examine Harlan's role. She paused. "It is not over, but it is no longer only your word against theirs." He absorbed that slowly. For years, the world had been a locked room where every wall repeated the same accusation. Now one wall had cracked, and beyond it came air. Behind them, Mara sat near the fire with her eyes closed, one hand still resting on a stack of documents, as if afraid they might vanish. Caleb, wrapped in a blanket, muttered to a responder that he had always mistrusted expensive coats without dog hair on them. Jonah almost smiled. Talon stepped onto the porch and leaned against his leg. His fur smelled of snow and smoke. His scarred ear lifted toward the breathing vents. The house of Arthur Bellamy, carved into stone in winter, had kept its silence for decades. It had held tapes, diagrams, guilt, stubborn hope, and an old man's unfinished argument with the dark. Now, at last, it had spoken loud enough for the mountain to answer. Jonah looked out over the ridge, where light gathered on the snow like a blessing too honest to be easy. He did not feel free. Not yet. But for the first time, the door was open. Months later, winter still held the high country of Colorado. But the light had changed. It was not softer exactly. Mountain light was never soft for long. It came sharp over the ridges, struck the snow, and filled the world with a brightness that asked every living thing to stand honestly inside it. Yet, to Jonah Sterling, that same light no longer felt like judgment. It no longer seemed to expose only what had been broken. Now, some mornings, it revealed what had endured. The ceremony took place in a plain military hall outside Denver, with polished floors, folded flags, rows of chairs, and too many people trying to stand like they had not been afraid to come. Jonah wore a dark wool jacket over a white shirt, simple and clean. His dog tags remained beneath the collar. The brass compass Arthur Bellamy had given him sat in his pocket, its small weight steadier than any metal. Talon sat at his left side. The German shepherd had been brushed for the occasion, though he clearly considered grooming a form of administrative overreach. His black and gold coat shone under the fluorescent lights, his scarred left ear crooked as ever, his amber eyes fixed on the room with the grave patience of a judge forced to attend a poorly organized meeting. Mara Quinn sat in the front row, satchel beside her like a veteran of its own campaign. Caleb Rourke had worn a tie under protest and had tied it so badly that Mara fixed it twice before giving up. Naomi Kessler stood near the back, hands folded, face unreadable, though Jonah had learned by then that her silence was not emptiness, it was containment. They called his name. Jonah walked forward. The official language was careful. It always was. The prior conviction had been vacated, the record amended, the findings corrected, the accusations of deliberate misconduct removed. Formal regret was expressed for failures in review, oversight, and preservation of evidence. Words came dressed in uniforms and legal shoes. Still, they came. A certificate was placed in his hands. Then a restored commendation. Then an apology spoken aloud, not whispered in a hallway, not buried in a memo. A colonel Jonah did not know looked him in the eye and said that his service had been honorable. Honorable. The word landed heavily, not like a trumpet, more like a stone lifted from a well. For years Jonah had imagined that if the truth ever returned, it would arrive like sunrise over a battlefield, golden and absolute, burning away every shadow. Instead, it arrived as paper, signatures, witnesses, a tightness in his throat, and Talon leaning his warm shoulder against his leg as if reminding him that breathing remained the first duty. The past did not disappear. No certificate could bring back Mason, Ibarra, or Kell. No apology could restore the winters under bus station awnings, or the look on Claire's face, or the silent turning away of men he had once trusted. But something had been cut loose. Not grief, not memory. The rope around his name. After the ceremony, a few former soldiers approached him near the side of the hall. They came slowly, as if Jonah were not a man, but a door they had once nailed shut and now did not know how to open. One of them, Sergeant Eli Mercer, had aged more than Jonah expected. His hair had gone thin at the temples. His hands shook when he took off his cap. "I believed it," Mercer said. Jonah did not answer. Mercer swallowed. "I wanted to. That's the part I hate. If it was you, then it wasn't the system. It wasn't command. It wasn't us standing there while the wrong thing got sealed up. His eyes reddened. "I'm sorry." Behind him, another man stared at the floor. A third wiped his face and pretended not to. Jonah felt anger rise, familiar and loyal. Anger had kept him upright when no one else would. It had slept beside him, eaten with him, wrapped itself around his ribs on the coldest nights. But now, in that hall, anger felt tired. Useful once, too heavy now. "I'm not ready to make you feel better," Jonah said. Mercer nodded, pain and relief crossing his face together. "I know. But I heard you." That was all Jonah had to give. It was not forgiveness. It was not nothing. Talon chose that moment to sneeze on Mercer's polished shoe. Caleb, from 10 feet away, whispered loudly, "That dog has exceptional timing." For the first time that day, several men laughed through tears they had been trying to hide. The investigations didn't end with the ceremony. They only became harder to ignore. Colonel Wade Harlan faced formal inquiry for concealing command failures and allowing post-incident records to be shaped around a convenient scapegoat. Northgate Strategic Solutions came apart under charges of contract fraud, obstruction, and data manipulation. Gideon Vale was indicted with the same polished expression he had worn the first day he offered Jonah money in the Outreach Center. His eyes, in the news footage, remained cold and faintly offended, as if the world had committed an etiquette error by holding him accountable. Some of Arthur Bellamy's old files were declassified in part. Victor Vale's name, long hidden beneath equipment drift and sealed reviews, returned to daylight. The newspapers did not make Arthur a hero in the way stories like to crown old men after they were gone. But the record changed. It said he had warned, preserved, documented. It said he had not been paranoid. That mattered to Jonah more than he expected. Arthur had carried a small flame through decades of cold, cupping it in engineers' hands, protecting it from men who preferred darkness with official letterhead. In the end, the flame had not burned down the world. It had lit a way out. The settlement offer came later. It was large enough to make Caleb whistle and Mara frown. Jonah stared at the number for a long time at Arthur's kitchen table while Talon slept under it, one paw resting on Jonah's boot. He did not refuse it like a saint in a story. He had slept outdoors. He had counted coins for dog food. He had delayed Talon's vet appointments longer than shame allowed him to admit. Nobility did not replace a furnace, fix a roof, or pay for an old dog's hips. So Jonah used part of the money. He paid debts. He repaired the house. He bought a used truck with 4-wheel drive and a heater that did not sound like a dying accordion. Talon received a proper orthopedic bed, which he ignored in favor of the best chair by the hearth. Jonah also paid every remaining legal bill, despite Mara arguing that some of them were morally fictional. The rest went into a fund. Mara handled the structure. Naomi advised from a distance, claiming she was not emotionally invested, which fooled no one. Caleb knew contractors, plumbers, weatherproofing crews, and one electrician who owed him a favor involving a snowmobile, a church parking lot, and a story no one ever told the same way twice. Arthur's half-buried house became Bellamy Ridge Veterans Rest. Jonah refused to make it look like an institution. He had been processed by enough institutions to distrust any hallway that smelled of floor wax and helplessness. The house kept its stone walls, its narrow windows, its round concrete hearth. The main room smelled of pine logs, coffee, damp wool, and bread Mara sometimes brought from town, despite insisting she did not cook. The old radar room changed slowly. The consoles were cleaned and placed behind glass, not as trophies, but as witnesses. A brass plaque read, "Machines once listened for war here. May they now remind us to listen for one another." The map table became a place where men and women could sit without being asked to explain themselves. Shelves held books, puzzles, old field manuals, notebooks, and cards from families who had learned that healing rarely looked dramatic. Sometimes it looked like a person sitting beside a fire for 3 hours, saying nothing, and then asking for more coffee. Talon became the unofficial soul of the place. He had an actual bed near the hearth, labeled with a small wooden sign Caleb carved, "General Dog." Talon used it only when visitors needed the best chair more than he did. New arrivals often trusted him before they trusted Jonah. They would sit stiffly, hands clasped, eyes scanning exits, shoulders up around their ears. Talon would approach with slow dignity, sniff once, judge them acceptable or in need of further review, then place his head on a knee. Heavy, warm, patient. He did not ask what they had done. He did not ask who they had lost. He did not ask whether they had been right, wrong, brave, afraid, forgiven, or forgotten. Mercy, Jonah learned, did not always descend like a blessing from stained glass. Sometimes it arrived with 4 paws, 1 scarred ear, and a talent for stealing unattended biscuits. One morning after a fresh snow, Claire came. Jonah saw her from the window before she knocked. She stood beside a small rental car, coat pale blue-gray against the white road, hands gripping the strap of her purse. Her hair was tucked into a cream scarf. She looked older than the memory Jonah had carried, but kinder too, or perhaps only less defended. Talon rose from the hearth and went to the door. He did not bark. When Jonah opened it, Claire looked first at him, then at the dog. "Hi, Talon," she said softly. Talon watched her for a long moment. Then he sneezed. Claire's mouth trembled into a small, wounded smile. Fair. Jonah stepped aside. They sat in the living room where the fire burned low, and the morning light lay across the stone floor. Claire did not ask for coffee. Mara was mercifully away in town. Caleb was outside arguing with a vent pipe. Naomi had returned to Denver, but still appeared in Jonah's life through brief messages that read like classified haiku. Claire held her gloves in both hands. "I don't want to take much of your time," she said. "You drove 2 hours through mountain roads," Jonah said. "Might as well take enough to justify the tires." A little breath of laughter escaped her, then faded. She looked at the hearth, the windows, the house that had somehow become shelter after being a vault. "I came to say it out loud," she said. "Not in a letter, not because anyone made me, and not because I expect you to make me feel better." Jonah waited. Claire's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "I am sorry. I believed the record because it was easier than believing the people who made it could be that wrong. I believed grief when it wore a uniform. I let my family, the hearings, the funerals, all of it decide what kind of man you were." Her voice broke, then steadied. "And when I wasn't sure, I chose silence. I know silence did harm." The fire shifted. Outside, Caleb cursed at something metallic, and the ordinary sound kept the room from becoming too sacred to breathe in. Jonah looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who had left, the woman who had also been broken by a lie designed to make grief choose sides. Once he might have wanted this moment to repair everything. Now he knew better. "I carried a lot of doors in my head," he said. "Some I wanted to kick open. Some I wanted to seal shut forever." Claire listened as if every word mattered, because perhaps now it did. "There are doors that open," Jonah continued. "There are doors that don't, and there are some you just learn to stand in front of a little longer without running." Claire nodded. Tears slipped down her face, quiet and unadorned. "I understand," she said. He did not say he forgave her. He did not say he never would. He stood when she stood. At the door, Talon came forward. Claire did not reach for him. She waited. After a moment, Talon pressed his muzzle briefly against her gloved hand. It was not absolution. It was permission to leave without being hated by the dog. For Claire, it seemed enough to make her cry harder than any speech could have. She left gently, and Jonah watched her car move down the snow-lined road until the pines took it from sight. By noon, the first guests arrived. 3 veterans from towns scattered across the high country. One older man with a cane and eyes that never stopped moving. One woman who stood outside for 10 full minutes before Caleb wandered over with a mug and pretended he needed advice about the driveway. One quiet man in his 50s who asked whether he had to talk. "No," Jonah told him. "You can just sit." The man looked suspicious. "That allowed?" Talon, as if hearing a procedural question, walked over and placed his head on the man's knee. Jonah nodded. "Apparently required." The man sat. The house received them without ceremony. Fire in the hearth, coffee on the table, snowlight through the narrow windows. The old radar consoles behind glass, no longer blind machines in a buried room, but reminders that listening had once been a matter of survival, and could be again. Mara taped a donation sign near the entry, slightly crooked. She stepped back, frowned, adjusted it, made it worse, and declared it legally sufficient. Caleb complained that the heating duct in the west room sounded like a goose with secrets. Naomi stood at the edge of the porch in a dark coat, officially present for no reason at all. "You look uncomfortable," Jonah said. "I am observing a post-investigation community implementation," Naomi replied. "That coffee in your hand part of the implementation?" "Evidence," Jonah almost smiled. Talon trotted through the snow between the porch and the path, leaving paw prints beside boot tracks. His scarred ear caught the light. The new wooden sign above the door read, "Bellamy Ridge, Veterans Rest Beneath It," smaller letters. No one has to explain the whole story on the first day. Jonah stood before the stone wall and laid his palm against it. The house was warm now, not perfectly. It still groaned in wind, argued through pipes, and hid screws in places that made Caleb accuse Arthur's spirit of sabotage. But it no longer felt like a secret held underground. It felt like a chest rising after a long-held breath. There were places built to hide what men feared. There were also places that could be remade to shelter what men and women were finally brave enough to carry into the open. Snow began again, light and slow, falling over the ridge, over the pines, over the road where the first visitors had come, walking between white banks. Once, snow had buried evidence, tracks, names, and years. Once it had made the world look clean before it was. Now it fell differently, not as a cover, as a blanket, wide, white, patient. Jonah looked down at Talon, who had returned to lean against his leg with the full authority of a creature who had saved everyone and expected lunch to reflect that fact. "All right," Jonah said. "You win." Talon sneezed. Beyond them, the veterans entered the house one by one. Mara called for more mugs. Caleb complained louder about the duct. Naomi pretended not to smile. And Jonah Sterling, whose name had once been buried beneath snow, stone, and official silence, opened the door wider. This time he was not looking for a way out. He was making a way in. The heart of this story is not only that truth can rise after being buried, it is that healing often begins before the world says, "We were right." Jonah did not find peace because every wound disappeared. He found it because he chose to keep walking, to protect what was true, and to turn a house once built for secrets into a place of shelter. Sometimes grace comes like a thunderclap, but more often it comes quietly, through one loyal friend, one open door, one honest apology, one warm room after a long winter. May this story remind us that no season of loss has the final word when hope is still breathing. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of courage, healing, and the quiet miracles that find us when we need them most, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one. May peace find you wherever your own road leads tonight.